So, one of the most brilliant authors and most engaging reading I've ever read is given to you today for this section, part of it, which is the introduction to Elaine Scarry's book, The Body and Pain. And this book delves into the language and the difficulties of the human language of dealing with pain. So you just read a little bit of the introduction, but I think it gives you some insight into how we try to express pain. And for our purposes, we're reading the Book of Lamentations, which was collective pain, but this could also equally be applied to individual pain. Now, think about first what kinds of adjectives you use to describe pain, any kind of pain. Imagine you're going to the doctor and you're trying to describe maybe a really severe headache or some other pain, and your doctor asks you to describe it. How do you do that? Think about that. So what adjectives do you use? Maybe, I don't know, pounding, pounding, throbbing, stabbing, I don't know, burning, searing, any of those kinds of, I can't think of any adjectives, having too much of a good day, I guess. So if you think about those adjectives, for example, all of those, according to Elaine Scarry, reflect some sort of allegory or analogy, basically. Analogy is a better term. In other words, we're looking at pounding as if there was a hammer coming down on my head, or throbbing, same thing, as if something was pressing down on me. Stabbing pain, as if a knife were coming in to me, even though usually that wouldn't be happening, literally. Burning, as if there was fire, or searing, as if there was a fire on me or under me. Those sorts of things. So according to Scarry, those all reflect this idea that we have to resort to simile, something that as if, because we can't actually describe the event of pain itself. And you don't have to agree with her, but I want you to think about that. Another example, has any of you ever seen this chart? Unfortunately, I've seen it more than I care to have seen it. If you ever go to the emergency room, God forbid, and you have an accident and they pull this thing out, and what the heck is this? Basically, this is Elaine Scarry in action, showing you how difficult it is to describe pain, and this is their attempt. It's kind of like a cartoonish kids book kind of attempt to describe pain. The reason they do that is because for documentation or medical purposes, they have no way of quantifying or qualifying your pain. So they give you numbers, but if you think about it, this is very random, because my 9 might not at all be your 9. It might be a 7 or a 3, and your 3 might be something different for me. There's no way of knowing. And then these little cartoonish figures are so hilarious. Like somehow your furrowed brow and pursed lips and breath holding is around a 4. It seems very, very random to me. Slow blinking, open mouth, and then eventually your eyes closed, moaning and crying. Now, this might just be a little bit of a construct, but it does reveal what Elaine Scarry talks about, in that we do have incredible difficulty trying to convey pain to other people. In fact, at the very end here, when it says moaning and crying, one of the things she mentions in your reading was at some point pain breaks down language to the point where you sometimes cannot even form words. I don't know if you've ever been in that sort of pain. When I had my appendix inflamed and appendicitis before it was removed, I remember just thriving and kind of thrashing on the emergency room bed. I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't form sentences. I was just sort of groaning. And that is what she says, that pain actually can destroy language. So that's something to think about. For her, the description is the reason that pain is so difficult even though we have other interior events or emotional events that she says are different, we can convey those things. For example, love or hate or anger, any of those things, those are interior events, but she said it's different than pain because with all of those interior events, they have an external object. So if I'm feeling love, I usually don't just wake up in the morning and say, oh, I feel love, unless I'm from Boulder, that might happen. But usually you have love of or love for someone or something. White chocolate raspberry cheesecake. Usually you have your hatred of something or someone or anger about something. You don't just wake up angry. There's usually always an object. And so for her, you're the subject of these interior events, but there's an external object to those internal events. But with pain, we are the subject and we're also the object of that. So there's very little ability to transgress the boundaries of our bodies. And so I might be sitting on a bus next to someone who's in death-defying, excruciating pain, and I would never know it because that person is the subject of that pain and also the recipient of those feelings. And that's why it can be so incredibly difficult to express that pain from the inside and to get it to the outside. And also, she mentioned in your reading today, one of the reasons why it can be so excruciatingly lonely, because you cannot invite anyone in and no one can actually feel that with you. So keep that in mind, and that's partly why when you have collective pain, there's a need for everyone to process it together or collectively. So if we go to this image, what do you feel? So for her, she would say, when you see an object that creates pain, that does sort of intensify our interior feelings about that. So you might have cringed at this picture and thought, oh, as if I were the one holding that knife the wrong way. And she said most people would feel something in their hand or a cringe or something. And this is a poster by Amnesty International, if you know anything about them, a nonprofit that works to rescue those who are oppressed or in prison or tortured throughout the world. And part of their campaign is to get other people, say in the United States or elsewhere, to feel other people's pain and suffering from other parts of the world to help alleviate that. So part of their campaign is to get you to feel others' pain, collective pain, to maybe get you to work or to try to help or to donate. So in this case, the idea is that if you see this image, you're going to feel some of that pain, which maybe sounds gross, but that's the only way that you can kind of share that a little bit. Yeah. So in the book, in your chapter, there's a passage where it quotes an image in the Guggenheim, and it's an image of a knife wrapped in gauze in a bandage. And it said, when your cut hurts, bandage the knife. It's something like that. I don't have it in front of me. So when you have cut yourself and you keep looking at the knife, the idea is that you're still going to be living that pain or experiencing that pain. So the idea is that you bandage the knife, you hide the knife. So in this example, as well as this picture, I just want to show you one of these external objects that she said might trigger the a little bit of a shared pain. Like I might feel a little bit of that, or someone else might see this picture and feel a little bit of what it would feel like to cut your hand. Even though she said at the end of the day, we're still not really able to experience it completely. So a couple other images that are some of those rare attempts at trying to collectivize our pain. One of them is, again, Amnesty International showing a picture just of blood. Why is it that so many persons have a lot of problem with blood or seeing blood or might faint at the sight of blood? Blood itself is not necessarily dangerous when used properly and taken care of, but it triggers the thought of pain. So they don't show a lot of blood on American news, or they censor that a lot because it usually makes someone feel that twinge of what if I were bleeding, which is exactly what this ad is playing on. If somebody feels like, ooh man, what if I were suffering the effects of war? And so they play on this detergent commercial to kind of show how simplified we look at our detergent commercials, but yet for some people in the world, it really is a matter of not stopping the suffering and the war and turmoil. And then, of course, we have religious objects that are used to attempt or to trigger communal suffering. Collectivized pain. You may be familiar with this. It's a representation of Christ dying on the cross. According to the narrative, he had a crown of thorns placed on his head and pushed into his skull. And so the crown of thorns has become an image where people can, usually followers of Christ, identify with Christ's suffering or feel a collective suffering. Of course, another very famous image of that is the cross itself. So if you think about that, cross is a torture device from ancient Rome, and the idea that it becomes such a pervasive symbol in Christianity to wear either with the crucifixion with the body of Jesus on it or just to wear alone is an attempt to trigger the memory of that pain and suffering and to collectivize it, to feel that we're sharing that suffering. Of course, in Judaism, we have other triggers or images that connect with that communal pain or suffering. Obviously, the Holocaust, barbed wire, the things that trigger the suffering, tremendous suffering of the Holocaust. So in that way, I want you to think about pain, and in particular collective pain, as you're reading the Book of Lamentations. Now, they don't use images, they don't use objects like this, but they do use words to attempt to share, not only process together that kind of pain, but to share the communal nature of that. And think about our own culture, our own traumatic events. For example, 9/11, although you may have been fairly young when it happened. What ways did we work through our collective pain? Did we use language that was similar to Lamentations? Did we use other language? How did we process that? How did we deal with our collective trauma?